Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. We're out in the field because there's still quite noisy building works in the garden where I usually film. However, this does mean that there might be chickens and sheep and traffic from the lane behind as well. So we'll have to see how that all turns out. I wanted to start this week by thinking about some of the things that we do when we hear that there's been a tragedy or a terrible situation or a loss. How do we speak into that situation? We're going to explore that more in Thought for the Day. It's not really just a rural ministry challenge, it's more of a challenge for everybody. I mean, there are some extra things in a rural situation, so that if you're trying to go to somebody's house to see them, you have to be able to find their house. If you already know them, that's simpler. But if you've been called in perhaps to do a funeral visit, then you need to be able to find the house in the lane, know where to park, know what colour their front door is. But when it gets to the moment where you're actually about to ring the doorbell or about to knock the knocker, how do you know what you're going to say in that really difficult situation? And that's a really difficult thing for people to know what to do, vicars included. It's difficult. I once had to make a very, very difficult phone call where a child had died and I needed to phone someone up and speak to them about it. And I sat at my desk for a few minutes and thought, what am I going to say? What can I possibly say in this situation? How can I speak into it? And I decided that actually there were only two things that I could say, and that was how terribly sorry I was that this had happened and that I was praying for them. And that has stood me in good stead for my other pastoral encounters in that way, just to say how terribly sorry I am to hear that this terrible news has happened, and to reassure people that I'd be praying for them. And that allows people to speak and to respond to that however they like to. They might be angry with God because something terrible has happened. They may just be broken and just completely affected by the tragedy. The one thing that I would say, which is really important, is that it's much more important to speak than not to speak. Everybody who's been through a really difficult situation has told me that it is better for people to speak to them even if they don't know what they're going to say than not to speak to them at all. So that's my challenge for today. Actually, when someone's suffered a difficulty or a tragedy, speak to them. Don't say anything fancy. You don't need to make excuses for God. You just need to speak to them and make sure that you know that they know that you are there for them. I'm not preaching on the lectionary passage for this week, so I've had to go and have a special look at it and think about what I would usually say about it. So it's Matthew chapter 9, beginning at verse 35, going through to Matthew chapter 10, verse 8, but optionally going on to verse 23. So it's a passage where Jesus tells his disciples to go out and preach and pray and heal and those sorts of things, and he gives them the instructions about not taking too many things with them. It says don't take an extra tunic, don't take loads of money, don't take a bag. Just says just take exactly what you need, and then Jesus gives them the instructions about what happens if they go to a town where their message isn't appreciated. And then it goes on to speak about the fact that things are going to be very difficult and there's going to be really difficult situations, and what people should do about speaking up in those situations. So usually I think I focus on the stuff bit. I talk about having too much stuff, how we can have an issue if the stuff that we have starts controlling our lives. And I speak as someone who has moved house just over a year ago, and we were moving from quite a big house to a smaller house, and I was quite anxious about all the stuff that we had, and I was very relieved that when the moving men left, we managed to shut all the doors of the house and everything was inside. And then I might talk about a book that I have called Maisie's Big Bag of Worries, and about how someone actually unpacks that bag for her, and talk about how stuff can be associated with that. But when I was reading the passages in preparation for filming today, I was thinking, well, actually, I'm really interested in this bit about speaking And when Jesus says, don't worry about what you're going to say, because God will give you the words that you need. That's what it says in Matthew 10:19. God will give you what you need to say. And Jesus talks about the Spirit inspiring as part of that process as well. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, that how we have to trust in difficult situations that God will give us what we need to say, even though we may feel that we don't know what we want to say or what the best thing is to say in those situations. And then I was thinking about Moses. So you can read this in Exodus 4. So Moses, the leader of the Israelites, he was having a conversation with God, and God was saying, I want you to go and free the people. You need to sort this out with Pharaoh. And Moses was making a whole load of excuses about not being an orator, not being able to speak well in public, that he didn't feel he could do it, and God said, you can do it, this is what you need to do. And Moses said, actually God, I really want you to send somebody else and not me. And then God says, I will send Aaron to go with you, your brother, and I will help you both to speak. Because it is hard to know what to say in situations. In day to day, we're probably not facing Pharaoh in our lives, but there are difficult situations where there's been a tragedy or pain, or there's conflict, or even just day to day things where we feel that we need to say something about God and we don't really know how to say it. This is still true for vicars as much as it is for ordinary Christians, that sometimes we feel stumped and we don't know what to say. In some ways, it is easier for me as a vicar, because as soon as I admit that I'm some sort of vicar, then people will respond to me and respond to that fact. I mean, sometimes they respond quite extremely. I remember one time I was introduced to a very sweary person, and they started swearing, and then they apologised and stopped themselves, and then started talking again and started swearing again, then stopped, then apologised. And I thought, we're going to get into a vicious circle here unless one of us just stops having an issue with how you speak, and I don't have an issue with that. But yes, that isn't usually what happens. What happens is people are keen to ask me questions, and people are keen to find out about my faith journey. They're interested to find out about what I did before I was a vicar, why I wanted to be a vicar, or why I felt called to be a vicar, and those sorts of questions come, and I just need to answer them as best I can. I need to listen and I need to pray as I'm talking to them, because those questions for them are coming from somewhere. Sometimes people start divulging all sorts of things that they want to talk about, or they have questions that they want to talk about, or issues that they want to explore. So those are the things that happen to me. But actually, if you're in a situation where you kind of admit that you're a Christian to somebody, they will start asking you questions and talking and wanting to know a little bit more about things. Again, more important to speak than not to say anything, but to trust what God is going to give you to say. Don't be stupid. Don't say stupid things to people. You kind of know what they are. Don't say trite things to people either, but actually listen to where the question is coming from. Pray, and then trust that God will give you the right thing to say. I was wondering what to put in for the Dibley Moment of the week this week, and I was thinking about speaking and listening, and actually thinking about calling for help, because we had a situation recently in one of our church buildings where somebody collapsed during a service and they needed to call an ambulance, and that was quite easy for them. They were on it, they called the ambulance came really quite soon, so that was all really good. But it has then left me wondering about how that would work in some of our other church buildings, because although we live quite near to some really large places, we have really terrible mobile phone signal in some of the villages that we're in, and some of the church buildings. So what are we going to have to do? Well, we're going to ask in each meeting of each of the churches where we go, what would happen. So have people got their mobile phones with them, and do they know for certain that there is any mobile phone signal? And what really makes this a Dibley moment is that there is one church building which we believe we're going to have to put a little map in, which will say if you need to call, then there is this tiny patch of mobile phone signal. If you go out of this door and up the steps to the edge of the churchyard, then you will be able to phone for an ambulance or for emergency services from there. So we're just trying to make sure that everybody can do it, and make sure that everybody A, has their phone with them, and B, knows exactly which little patch of their churchyard gets actually the best mobile phone signal, so they can actually speak to somebody. That's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small and however good your mobile phone signal, have a really blessed week.